was awful. It was really awful. I worked in a 5-person business and the boss was just the most toxic person you've ever met. I think during that stint, I could have lost a lot of my self-worth, and I was losing it. And I'm really glad that I took myself out of that to ensure. And the benefit of it, in a weird, twisted way of events, is that creators hate it. And I've talked to my friends about it. I said, LinkedIn is waiting to be disrupted. I was featured on BBC World News, like within a week of that article going live. So it was all very crazy, all before I'd even ran an event. Variation every day is super important. And I think as you go through your career, you definitely start to identify, okay, what brings me joy? What do I genuinely get a buzz from? A really good question for figuring out your passion as well is
could you do me a massive favour and click follow or subscribe button? It helps the podcast out so much. Hello and welcome back to the Making Dream podcast. So I'm joined by Stef Sword-Williams, the author of Fuck Being Humble. So thank you for coming on the podcast today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah,
it's quite surreal because I remember I went to one of your talks on the dots, and that was the first time I got kind of introduced to Fuck Being Humble and kind of self-promotion not being like a dirty word. So it's great to kind of find out a bit more about yourself. And I think with Fuck Being Humble, the first thing that comes to mind is was you always quite confident as a kid? I don't know, when I think about what Fuck Being Humble is, I always think someone who's super confident. Can we talk a bit about your childhood and kind of what was that like? Was you always confident as a kid, or has that influenced kind of the work you do now?
I mean, I always say I'd be lying if I didn't say I was very confident as a child growing up, for sure. Very chatty, always encouraged to socialise. My parents were never worried about me being shy in the slightest. And my dad's joked that I've been probably public speaking since I was about 4, to be honest. So I definitely think it was something that felt quite natural to me. But interestingly, the statement "fuck being humble" resonates most with those who are less confident, because you're more likely, if you're an extrovert, to be telling people that you're good at what you do, right? So although it seems like the business should be ran by someone who's, really confident and really bold and someone who's gonna maybe take over a room, actually the message is most resonant with people who are struggling to find that confidence and to find that self-belief, or have sat on their self-worth and not communicated it enough. That's what I've noticed the most, is that naturally it automatically resonates with people who are probably a little bit more outgoing, but I think it unlocks that self-belief that sort of people who identify as maybe introverts or shyer really need, that sort of coming out of their shell.
Have you always got that self-belief, or is it something you got later on in your life or kind of grown up? Because some people have always got that kind of self-confidence, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to achieve. How's that been for you?
So self-belief, the meaning of self-belief is the ability that you can do something with or without the skills. And I think I have a mindset which is very determined. I'll always push myself to work really hard, providing I'm slightly good at it.
Where's that from then? Is that from your parents? Because I find me personally, my dad's work ethics, and also my mum as well, but particularly my dad, they've come from nothing and they've done really well.
Yeah.
And just seeing that work ethics in the family and kind of seeing that firsthand has really rubbed off on me. Has that been the same for you with your family? There's certain traits which you kind of picked up and kind of took forward?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, both my parents are super hardworking. They both didn't have loads growing up, but have done really well in their careers and have always encouraged us to do well. We always had a job at 15 working.
Really?
We were there was no oh, here's all your pocket money. It was always very no, you go work, you graft sort of thing. And the same, my dad's was talking about, we used to have revision timetables, and there's one memory where he'd made a timetable for me and was he wasn't pushy, but he just wanted to make sure that we allocated that time. And I actually fell asleep on the dining room table with my head down at 8 o'clock, because it's interesting, my style of learning is definitely not that revising. I'm much more of a creative person, which is why when I did coursework, I very much excelled in that, because I could do creative work where I was thinking about things in a long period of time instead of revising, which was an interesting learning for me as an individual, because that shows what I do now, and the way that I work now is very much influenced by longer term thinking rather than being put on the spot in that way. But in terms of the sort of inspiration of knowing to go down that path. And my parents, like, they absolutely have always supported me. My dad's sort of always worked in sales, so naturally has been able to.
I'm sure you picked up on that. I mean, that must really help with public speaking now, getting in front of a crowd of people and like, yeah.
But he would also like take my CV and like, you know, I definitely have him to thank. You know, my mum was great as well, but my dad was great at like, I'm going to use the word embellishing elements on my CV. You know, he could make my Saturday job at Office Shoes sound like I was a shoe entrepreneur from 17, you know, like he was very good at showing me actually here are the things you need to pull out. And actually I think there's a really big missing chunk in education around careers. So I have a CV guide that you can download on the Fuck Being Humble website. And it's literally 15 pages, how to turn your work experience into business impact and value that they care about.
I remember going to your workshop as well, and you're saying like everybody uses the same words like passion, hardworking, motivated, and how you need to kind of change that as well, because you want to stand out if 500 people are all applying for the same job.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so easy to forget that. And I think it's so easy to just assume that people know what you've done, and actually they don't. If you're applying for a job via a CV, it's so important to get all that valuable information on there. And I definitely feel really grateful that I had the support from both parents on that, in that respect, that they definitely encouraged me to really think about the value I brought, even at, you know, student age.
Yeah, even at a young age. And it's funny, I remember I kind of read that your boyfriend said on your tombstone, it'll say fucking relentless. I mean, where does that come from? Have you always had that kind of like fire in your stomach to just go and get it? Like,
it's interesting. He actually hates me putting that out there because, and I do it in quite a few of my talks, and it's in my book. He's like, I sound like an awful person. He says lots of great things, but I think it was definitely said in a joking way when he said it. But I think in terms of my tenacity and hard work, I've just always been somebody who does put in a lot of effort to things. And maybe there's an element of that I didn't always feel academic. So I felt like I needed to over deliver in certain areas. And actually what I realized was like academia wasn't my strength, to be honest, but people skills and project management and creativity, absolutely. So there's some of the areas that people don't put in 110% if they are clever in certain industries and spaces. So I suppose that tenacity and that persistence and that continuous hard work in those spaces 100% has meant I've excelled quickly in my career. In almost every job I've been in, I've progressed really quickly. And I think that just comes really naturally. And I care. Like, it sounds really cheesy, but like I've always cared about the work I do, the industries I work for, the companies I work for, which is why I'd always get so frustrated and upset when I wasn't rewarded
you get quite personally attracted.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because when you put so much effort into it and you feel like you put your heart and soul into it and then you don't see results, so you don't get what you want, then it's quite disheartening in that sense.
Yeah, it is. And that's partly where Fuck Being Humble, the name came from, because actually it was more about, no, fuck being humble, I do deserve this, and no, fuck being humble, I am going to ask for this. And actually it was that constant feeling of like feeling overlooked or undervalued in the workplace that absolutely led me to that title and into the work that I'm doing now.
Yeah, it was really interesting in your book. You kind of spoke about mentors, and I think for me, like it wasn't until college that I actually had a mentor or a tutor who like really believed in me, and I never really had that through school. And it was really hard for me because I felt going through school like I wasn't good or I wasn't gonna achieve or go far in life. And it wasn't until this kind of tutor at college which had a massive influence on me to say, no, you can do this, and he kind of gave me that confidence. Have you had like mentors in your life which have had a massive influence on your life?
Yeah, I always joke that the mentors I've had aren't really like specific mentors. Like we've not sat down and said you're a mentor. So my dad and my stepdad I have very close relationships with. They're both like, you know, work in non-creative industries, but like love The Apprentice and Dragon's Den. And we always used to like spitball ideas and like very much like that. So I would say they were definitely really influential in like encouraging that notion of just coming up with ideas, even if it was for nothing, and like just being silly and just like always being
no
idea
is a bad idea as well.
Absolutely.
And I think someone's always got all these ideas, but then it's like taking action on that as well. But I think like I get ideas and I'm like, oh no, it's stupid. It's probably not if you put it out into the world. Like,
particularly in the creative industry, you have to come up with so much ideas anyway, so you're better off just sharing them. And then Kat Towers, shout out to her. She was my boss when I worked at ad agency in Manchester, and she was just always super empowering. Like, she was really like, would never take credit. She'd just be like, oh no, it wasn't me, it was Steph. Like, you know, like just amazing. At a very early, and I was only like a senior account exec, which was like the second, you know, like step up in the ad industry at my level, what I was working on. And she was just always so, like empowering, encouraging. She would always just give me the spotlight where credit was due, but also like create opportunities for me. And, you know, she was like, Steph has to come on this TV ad to LA, which arguably maybe I didn't, you know, like she really wanted to help me. And we're still really good friends now, even though she's still in Manchester, I'm in London. So I think that's a testament. But to this day, we'll have like a 2-hour texting, and we'll be messaging, and she's like, you could do this or you could do that. And there was a specific moment on the train, we were going for a meeting together, and she said to me, we were on a train to London. I was like, I just feel frustrated. I feel trapped in the team, blah, blah, blah. She was like, you don't have to do every idea within the company. She's like, if you want to, she'd come up with this great idea where she'd got tickets for wrestling because she loved wrestling, really random. That's and mad. She'd pitch some ideas of how they could launch in Manchester or something, and she got front row seats. And she was like, they didn't take my ideas, but I've got a connection with that organisation now. That's incredible. And she was just like, you know, just because you're an account manager, for everyone listening, project manager, or, you know, working more in the management of people, doesn't mean that you can't still have your own ideas. And obviously, you know, Foot Being Humble wasn't born until another 3 years later. But I think that permission to always be a creator and to not feel limited by the title you're in or the environment you were in really, really has like been influential on my journey.
So you're not kind of like boxed in or refined to like you can only do this kind of thing. It's quite interesting when you talk about that in empowerment and like giving other people the praise. It's quite interesting. Is it like one of the junior I think she's account Z now, but Katie in my team, like she's only young, but I can see her go really far because she always gives the credit to other people like all the time. And for me, I kind of notice that as well. And I think like it's great when you kind of, because I always think like some people are out for themselves. I mean, a lot of people, but like it's nice to get that kind of credit back as well.
It is, and I don't think we can overlook that everyone's out for themselves. Like everyone is. Like let's not lie about it. Like everyone is. It would be nice. There is definitely a me generation going on as opposed to a we, which I think we're trying to move more back to community giving, sharing, particularly when things like, you know, the pandemic happened. Sorry to mention it on the podcast, but I do think ultimately we are all driven by our own personal goals, and that is important to know, particularly in your career, because it comes down to you needing to ensure that you get what you want, not assuming that people will just give you credit. I do think it's an amazing leadership skill when people can look at other people and go, oh my God, they killed it, or if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be, you know, we wouldn't have landed the project. I think that's amazing, and it's a really, really impressive skill to have. But I also think it's one of those things where I wrote about in the book called the mama bear effect, where women in particular prefer to be a mama bear and support and celebrate other people than they do themselves, which then creates a cycle of not ever celebrating themselves, not accepting praise, and ultimately widens the gender pay gap and all of those things.
Do you think it's harder now in regards to a lot of people now are working from home? How do you still get yourself in front of your boss to be like, look, this is the work I've been doing? Because I think a lot at the minute it is like Google Chats.
Yeah, no, it is. And I get
a lot harder in that way.
For sure. So a lot of my business is corporate talks to businesses. So I deliver workshops where I come in and I can talk about how to self-promote at work, how to build more confidence, how to use emotional intelligence in the workplace, like lots of different topics. And one of the top questions that comes up is, how do I show the work I'm doing when I'm working remotely? And it's a really, really important question to have. And for me, I always say to people, it's like, you need to understand how best to update the people around you. So of course, if you're always in the Slack channel being like, smashed it again, I did this, it's going to be annoying. But if you can speak to your manager or whoever it is that you want to share the impact that you're having with, you can sort of say to them, look, I'd love to keep you updated on my progress because I'm working remotely and I just want to ensure that you know what I'm doing and vice versa. You don't have to chase me. and just sort of say, like, would you prefer a phone call once a week? Would you rather it in a weekly email? Like, how's best? I just want to make sure.
I think I'm really bad at that.
Yeah.
I think I'm really bad at just like being like, oh, like this piece of content has done really well. Like I've done.
But you're busy doing your job, right?
Yeah,
like that's the
it's
thing.
quite hard, yeah.
And that's so. Dory Clark is an entrepreneur, and she talks about. She's got a great book called Entrepreneurial You, and she talks about this heads down and needing to have a heads up. So very often in the workplace, we have heads down, which is just focusing on I'm going to do my job.
Yeah.
But if we don't bring our heads up and go, by the way, I did this, or by the look at the strategic side of things. How do I need to position myself? What meetings do I need to speak up in? Then we're really going to struggle to demonstrate that value. So I think it is difficult, but it doesn't have to be awkward, and it doesn't have to be arrogant, and it doesn't have to be self-indulgent. It could literally just be that.
And that's the first one comes to mind is like when you've done that good piece of work, like it feels like, oh, are people going to think I'm bragging? But like the whole point of the book is like you have to like put yourself out there in terms of like so people aware about the work you're doing. Like.
But also we need to break down what the meanings are, right? So self-promotion, self means I, and promotion is just an activity that supports an aim or a goal.
As simple as that, yeah.
It's not, it doesn't, the sad thing about it is that self-promotion has been done badly and done in an arrogant way. So we assume that it is arrogant. The task of self-promotion is not arrogant. Yeah. We need to get past that, and we need to recognize that we can tell our own stories however we want to, but we don't have to be consumed by the thought that everyone's going to think, oh, we're obsessed with ourselves, because it doesn't need to be that way.
And I really want to kind of talk about, obviously you worked in advertising and also you worked with brands and kind of working on their storytelling. So that's obviously had like a kind of massive influence now with the work you're doing. How was like working in advertising for you? Was that a really good opportunity to kind of learn about obviously how brands kind of tell these stories?
It absolutely was. I think one of the things that I realised was at university, I knew I wanted to go into advertising. I did a course for fashion communication promotion. It wasn't really fashion, it was just a bunch of fashionable girls. And I decided to specialise more on the advertising marketing route. And I started to write a blog, which was awful, and it's hidden in the depths of the internet now.
Can't find it now.
No one can find it. But what I realised was all the advertising that I wrote about, I gravitated toward purpose-led content. So it was always things about like charities were doing or things that were going to have a positive impact. So I went into the job, which is quite unusual at that age, at 21, to know exactly the type of advertising and work that I wanted to do. And I felt like every job I went to, and you'll know this, work in advertising, it's really hard to do purposeful work in advertising because out of the 20 briefs you get in a company, there's maybe one, and that one gets limited resources, or it doesn't have a lot of budget, or it doesn't get respect.
Small budget,
It's like you think you're going to get the option, but you don't. And there's few agencies in the world that specifically focus on doing good. And that's fine. Like, I understand that. But I think with that meant I always felt like I was chasing something that wasn't there. And I moved jobs quite regularly. So I moved jobs 6 times in 7 years, which I don't think is a bad thing, by the way. I think it's important to keep moving until you find your right space. But it really highlighted to me that unless I did something by myself, I was never going to get that creative control, that creative freedom, and really the opportunity to write my own briefs. And I think that's the luxury and the most enjoyment I get right now is just getting.
Did you have this burning desire then? So you was working in advertising?
I actually didn't. I didn't. No, I never thought, never in a million years did I think I'd run my own business. No way, no.
So it wasn't like something.
To be really honest, when I moved to London, I was quite lonely. I think a lot of people are when they move, particularly from the north. You're kind of used to everyone being bubbly and chatty, and it's not like that. And I really wanted to immerse myself into the creative industry in London, but I had no contacts. I worked in a 2-person startup. I only had 2 colleagues. I had a handful of uni mates, but they were all with their boyfriends, you know, all of that. And so I just felt like I want to meet people. And so I started Fuck Being Humble for a load of reasons, but a big part of it was to connect with amazing creatives and like-minded people. And I'm so grateful that now I've got an incredible network of people that I could call up and will help me tomorrow in a heartbeat from putting in that work. But definitely no burning desire. And even whilst I ran Fuck Being Humble as a side hustle for 2 years, I still, everybody was like, when are you going to quit your job and run Fuck Being Humble? I was like, I'm not. Like, I love my job in advertising. And I did. But it just got to the point where the book was coming out and I just knew my boss wasn't going to let me take time off for book tours and all of that. So it was kind of now or never to go.
Now or never. I was going to really ask you, what was that kind of transition between kind of coming up with Foot Being Humble, doing it on the side. When was that moment where you was like, I can do this full time? Was it, I know you mentioned the book, but then did you have loads of talks planned? And because I always think like financially, like as soon as you do something yourself, then you need to make sure that you've got enough money coming in each month to live on. Did you have that moment where, was it quite hard then making that transition from full-time job to running it full-time?
Well, it was because it was 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. So not my best timing, but you know, all things happen for a reason. So for me, like I say, my sole purpose was to create community events and basically make networking not shit. So all my mates were like, I'd never go networking. I hate networking. It's not for me. And I'd be like, oh, and it used to really frustrate me because I used to think, you've not experienced networking, you've not been in the right space or whatever. So my main goal was to run cool creative events in East London, build up a good community, meet people. I was always the lead act. I always make the joke, like I wanted to be a public speaker, so I made my own stage. I spoke, I delivered the workshop, and I also hosted panels with like really inspiring people, and they were amazing to help sort of attract new people, but also sharing their journeys. And so at that stage, no, I didn't see revenue opportunity. I didn't see how I could leave my full-time job, to which I was a business director at this point. So I wasn't necessarily, I was on a good salary. I was, you know, like it would be a lot for me to walk away from that. I got the book deal. I wrote the book in 8 months whilst working full-time. So it's very intense. And
how did you get the book deal? Was that...
They came to me. I was super lucky.
Oh, right. So they saw your channel then?
So I wrote an article on LinkedIn called Why I Launched a Self-Promotion Platform called Fuck Being Humble.
It went viral, didn't it?
Little viral. Like not major. We're talking like, I think it got like 500 likes sort of thing. But it was quite like back then. I feel like that happens a lot more now. But it was getting shared. Like people in Amsterdam were messaging me. People in the US were messaging me. Someone from the White House asked me if I'd come do a tour. It was like, it was super surreal. And no, well, so they actually ended up leaving, and it was all a bit, but I was featured on BBC World News like within a week of that article going live. So it was all very like
crazy,
all before I'd even ran an event. So I know I'm super like lucky, and that doesn't happen for everyone. And I know it's really important to talk about like survivorship bias, which is this idea that we only ever look at the 0.1% that survive, and we don't consider all the other people working really hard. So I know that was a strike of luck at that point, 100%.
Podcast is sponsored by Food Llama. So I do my food shopping online on Asda, and it's like a Google Chrome extension. So you download it to Google Chrome, and all the products either have a tick or cross against it. So if it's got a cross, you click on the cross. It'll tell you why you can't have it. So it might say it's got may contain nuts, or it might even say it contains nuts. At the minute, it's only working on Asda, but I know they are looking at rolling it out to other supermarkets very soon. But yeah, if you want to check out Food Llama and you do your grocery shopping online, check it out at heyfoodllama.com. I'll also leave a link in my podcast description as well if you want to check it. Everyone needs that bit of luck sometimes.
We do, and I think everyone will get it at some sort of time and stage in life, and it's important to hold on for that. But that was all super organic, and then I had about 3 or 4 publishers and agents call me like, you should write a book just from the title. They had no other information about me. And I literally laughed and said thanks but no thanks, and I hung up. I was like, I'm not a writer. Like,
so no experience in writing a book?
No, I was like, I did this to speak. I want to be a public speaker. I didn't do this to write. But it was when I started running the events and I started to see the impact it was having. And the first event had 30 people come. The second event had 40 people. And then the third event, which was about 4 months later, had 180 people. Oh my God, all organic, no paid advertising, nothing. Like people were coming, word of mouth. And I was like, hold on.
That's like the best advertising as well. Because you're not paying people to be there. People coming because actually what I learn. Like,
something was happening. And at that point, and particularly as well being from the north, like I was always really conscious that it was great that I was serving the London community, but I thought, you know, it'd be great also to like to apply all the things I'm going to be talking about into a book so that anyone in the world can read it and anybody can access it. And also from a price point perspective, I've always been really mindful of like my tickets have only ever been £10 to £15 or, you know, the book is £12 or slightly cheaper now actually, I think. But, you know, all of that advice in one book for that anybody can purchase was a really big thing for me, that actually I want everything that I shared to be as accessible as possible. So yeah, it was a total whirlwind experience, not at all what I thought, but in terms of making that leap, it was just timing this, like I said, I'd been asked to give talks in Copenhagen, Australia, New York, because the book was coming out. I was building up momentum. I'd already been getting some clients, like Unilever was one of my first clients. I worked with the Dots and Google. Like I was getting all of these great opportunities without even trying. Like
I was going to say, was them opportunities coming to you then? Or?
They were coming to me. So I was obviously I've always spoke about, if you go back to my earliest posts, I've always talked about the growth of being humble on LinkedIn. And I still to this day think it's a really great channel to promote on. And because ultimately it's where people self-promote the most and it's expected.
It's a channel I've never touched.
Creators hate it. And I've talked to my friends about it. I said, LinkedIn is waiting to be disrupted by creative people because it's got such a formulaic approach. The content's very similar. If you wanted to stand out, you could easily stand out. But because it's not that cool and maybe the user face could be slightly more refreshed, people kind of dodge it. But I would say a lot of my leads and a lot of the work that I do comes off the back of my content.
I think LinkedIn's quite good for organic reach as well, I've heard. And I know that LinkedIn, out of all the platforms, they're the ones like are not really pushing video as much as like TikTok or Instagram Reels. But yeah, it'd be really interesting to see if they do kind of start pushing the video content, whether creators kind of go in there.
I think they are. And again, but it's to that whole disruptive thing, isn't it? So when I post a reel on LinkedIn, it gets loads of engagement because people don't post it. So it's kind of like looking at the content you're already creating and resharing it. But the thing about LinkedIn is you're tapping into other people's networks, right? So if you like an image on Instagram, I don't know. Unless you share it to your story, I don't know. If you like something on LinkedIn, that notifies all of your network, right? So you're tapping into other people's networks, and I really have seen amazing results. So anyone listening, invest in LinkedIn.
Can we talk about the struggle of imposter syndrome? It's something even now, like talking to yourself, or even I like feel it. Am I good enough to asking these questions? People are gonna relate with me, like me. I don't know. Like I think you always like question yourself, and it's something I'm like, no, like you be confident. I remember listening to a podcast and the woman was saying like, just go in front of the mirror and just say like, you're the shit or something, and then go out, and then she does all these amazing public speakers. But that kind of frame of mind, is it something you've had to like deal with as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, writing my book was for sure the scary. There is nothing more public than writing a book and it being out in the world,
out there
and it never being able to be deleted, and you can't take down anything you ever said. So the thing that has helped me with imposter syndrome, and I share this a lot, is if one person benefits from what you're doing, doesn't matter, right? So I once heard someone say on a podcast that what's more important, your ego or impacting people? And I really hold on to that. And I've always been someone that is like, if the work I do or the things I say or the tiniest bit of one insight that I share can help someone leave a toxic work environment or start their own business or start a podcast or whatever it may be, then like, gosh, I'm just not that important, you know? Like my ego is not that important. And sure, it's not that easy in the moment. But I think ultimately, providing you're being a nice person and providing you are adding value, or I can see where, you know, if you're like an influencer that travels the world and posts photos of you like in amazing outfits and all of that, then of course, like that can be quite difficult for people to take if they're not in the same situations and stuff. But providing you're sharing work that has either had a good impact or could inspire someone or do something. And I think one of the things that's really helped me with imposter syndrome has been looking at how I could be a role model for other people. Because I don't think we do that. I don't think we see the fact that if I share this piece of work on LinkedIn as a young northern woman from Leeds, the impact that could have from other young northern. So somebody,
you want to see people like yourself, like, and you kind of resonate with the content. Then, like you said, like you're from Leeds, like
for sure,
really successful, like
So I had a dad get in touch to say, my daughter has you on her vision board.
Wow.
And
amazing.
She absolutely loves you. Like, would it be possible to book some sessions, some mentor sessions, and like get the book and all that? And I was like, absolutely. And that, honestly, I like pretty much cried on the spot, because that for me is just like highlighting the impact that can be had. And she is in the north, you know, she's like, it was around Stoke or something, like, and I have a lot of phone calls with people, and they're like, oh, you know, I just have thought that if you know, you had to be in London or you have to be in a big city, and I'm not in a big city, but reading your book or listening to your content just shows me that I can. And I think for me, like, I'd much rather share something knowing that I could be a role model than share something thinking oh, everyone's going to hate me. Because what life do we live?
You don't even like, sometimes you don't even realize the impact it does on other people. Like even with like my algae blog at the minute, like it's crazy like the messages you get. And I imagine it's the same obviously with the book and really helping people kind of find themselves or find their way. And yeah, it's incredible.
Someone I met at an event last week came to my session and she said, you know, having come to your workshops and read your book, I had the courage to leave a toxic work situation. And I realised how amazing I am. And I wouldn't have done that without you. And she started crying. And I was just like, oh gosh, I'm not stable for this. And she told me she'd bought the book for 15 people. And that for me is like just amazing, right? And I just think like, you know, of course there's days where I'm like, oh, can I do this? Who am I? Should I share this? Should I not? There's people that are more qualified than me. But I always say to people like, sure, there are people more qualified than you. Absolutely. But you're being given the opportunity. Yeah. So why would you unpick this for yourself? Like, what do you gain from this? Like, just be in that space and be like, amazing, I got
yourself
this.
As well. I think that's so important. I remember when I started the podcast or even like the Instagram, someone once said, oh, like, well, you're not the biggest personality. And like...
No, of course you're not. You're not trying to be either.
I'm not trying to be like the next like Gemma Collins. And but then it kind of like knocked my confidence a bit. And I was like, I don't know. Like, and it shouldn't have. And it obviously hasn't affected me now. Like I'm doing this, but like, yeah, it just makes you like...
I get trolled all the time.
Yeah.
On LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I had this woman comment on one of my posts saying, wow, I wish I was as narcissistic, self-centered and absorbed in myself as you are. I was promoting an event on career changes.
And trying to help people as well. Like,
I had
it's
a
just
guy,
jealousy as well. Yeah.
I had another guy from America message me just before my book was coming out. Like, I think I get what you're doing, but I have to let you know you've chosen the worst brand name I've ever seen, and I hope people don't fall for your poison. It's like,
so deep. But it's so annoying. Like you can get all these positive messages, and as a human, you always dig out. You always dig out like the negative, and then you cling on to that, which is annoying. Because I was going to ask in regard to like kind of people in these like toxic kind of work environments. What advice would you give to someone in terms of like finding that kind of self-belief to get out of it and know your self-worth?
So this is something that I experienced. The very first job I had in the creative industry, it was awful. It was really awful. I worked in a 5-person business and the boss was just the most toxic person you've ever met, screamed at everyone, told us we weren't worth, we shouldn't breathe the air he breathed. Like, it was like horrendous stuff. I remember going to a meeting once where he was just screaming at me the whole way through in the car, and it was a tiny sports car and he was driving 100 miles per hour, and I genuinely felt like unsafe. Like I felt unsafe in the space. And it was a weird relationship where he almost treated me like his protege and he wanted me to be his mini-me. Yeah. But the minute I did something good, he would like tear me down. It was awful.
Yeah, weird,
And I was crying every week, and like I'm very emotionally attached to my work, but I really noticed that the stress that I was under, and even now when I'm not stressed anymore. And I really noticed that working full time when you're working for other people is really difficult sometimes, and you do find yourself in these toxic environments. So a few things I'd say is, first of all, have a notepad, write it down, write everything down, like honestly, what happened, how it made you feel, what came off the back of it, and just keep documenting it and just get to a point where you review it and go, is it you or is it them?
Yeah.
Because it's very hard when you're in the emotional state to decipher whether you were being irrational or they were being mean and all of those things. But if you keep documenting, keep a track of maybe like 4 to 6 weeks. How regularly is it happening? Is it mainly you that's getting the heat of it? Like, is anybody there to support you? Are there any forms of solutions, or is there not? We didn't have a HR department. There was no one I could go to.
Because my girlfriend, like, in her last job, they didn't have a HR department. And yeah, it's crazy to think like some of these like pretty big agencies, like it's such an important, and my girlfriend said, next job, that's the first question I'm asking, have they got a HR department? Because it's such an important to feel safe or feel like you can be yourself in the office.
I think also set timelines for yourself, because the worst thing, and I speak to a lot of people about this, is looking back and going, gosh, I wasted 7 years there, you know? Yeah. So really like give yourself if this doesn't change in 6 months, I have to start looking. Yeah. It may not look, we've got a strange job climate at the moment, it's up and it's down. So it may not be that you'll get something straight away, but at least you'll be putting something into motion to feel like you're taking control. And the really important thing, and the thing that I was grateful that I did move quickly. So it was my first job as a graduate, and I only stuck it out for 11 months. And you know, this is not to my parents' discredit, but they were very much of the mind of like, you need to stick it out. It's your first job.
I've been in that situation.
And like, and still to this day, like people are like that. And I don't, you know, it wasn't, I'm glad that they, you know, they were trying to, I understand why. But I remember getting it to the point where it was too much. And it was my mum who was like, this is not worth it anymore. She's like, I would rather like send you money. And that was not like something she would usually do to ensure that your like mental health is okay. And I think interestingly, well, first of all, when I handed in my notice, I got 3 other job offers as a graduate with 11 months experience.
Amazing.
So for anybody listening that feels like they won't be able to get something, please just give yourself the chance. At least see what's out there. If you know, if you have to stick it out, fine, but see what else is out there because you don't know. And I think the other thing was like, it was at the risk of eroding all of my confidence. So you asked me earlier, like, have I always been confident? I think during that stint, I could have lost a lot of my self-worth, and I was losing it. And I'm really glad that I took myself out of that to ensure. And the benefit of it, in a weird, twisted way of events, is that I now have never, ever experienced anything as bad as that. I had a thick skin for when things did happen.
Yeah.
I was like water off a duck's back. You're nothing like the last boss I've had.
To,
and I have had some not so great people to work with. And I think that resilience very early on in my career is actually why I progressed quickly, because I could put in the hours and feel less affected by some of the comments that were made, or I knew how to work with difficult people very early on.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was not an experience I'd wish on anyone, but I think it's definitely built my character now. And I think it helped me to see my self-worth should never be compromised by someone else. And if I want something, I need to go get it, and I will not leave it in the hands of other people.
That's so important. And I think in my last job, like, I didn't get on with my manager. We didn't say eye to eye, and he always felt like he's constantly trying to put me in this little box.
Yeah.
And I remember one meeting, he like shouted at me. He was like, next time you got an idea, like, you put it through me, you don't put it through someone else. And it really got my like back up. And I think after that, but at the time that pushed me to do more of the Make Contain stuff. So even though I wasn't feeling like fulfilled in my job, I had Make Contain, I had that like kind of community aspect, so which I didn't have before. So, but yeah, it's important. Yeah.
I think weirdly these events that we experience do, and I worked for a company where I was really anticipating some level of a reward. It wasn't a huge promotion or pay rise, but just something to say like, we're grateful of what you've done. And there was nothing, like not even like here's a like £50 massage voucher or something. And I was really upset about it. And I remember talking to my sister about it, and she was like, you've got to stop giving it that 150%. Like, if they're not rewarding you in the same way, then why you stop working on weekends, stop working through your lunch breaks, finish on time. And actually it was from that I was like, oh, what do I do on my weekends? What do I do in my spare time? And that's where
like working all
and
the
that's
time,
where Foot Being Humble really flourished, because actually, to your point, you invest in the things that you really care about and the things that you have slightly more creative freedom over, right?
How's lockdown been for you? Because I think I wanted to kind of touch upon this a little bit, because I know it gave people time to kind of reflect on kind of their life or maybe the job. Did it give you time to reflect on kind of Foot Being Humble and where you kind of want to take it over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so ahead of the pandemic, I'd made the decision to quit my job. I'd lined up 6 months worth of business. I did everything by the book. And then literally overnight, everything went. You know, HR and development budgets got cut straight away. So I then had to turn to the community that I'd grown and sort of really look to them to purchase products and sell my courses to. So I think in the first half of it, the first year, it was really just, I've got to pay the bills. I've got to find ways to, you know, help the communities, help people get by, all of these things. I think the second half has been a lot more, like it's been a lot better. I've done a lot more brand partnerships, working with brands like Puma and Adidas, Estee Lauder, lots of different brands. So that's really interesting. And I'm now actually working, so I have sort of multiple streams. I have business to community, so business to customer, events, those sorts of things, B2B, corporate talks, B2P, which brand partnerships, I'd say, which is essentially me delivering, allowing access to my audience or sharing insights. And more recently, I'm working with brands on sort of consulting on particularly what women are looking for in the confidence space. So I'm working with quite a big beauty brand at the moment, guiding them on their brand purpose, which again is strange because I'm doing full circle back to advertising, but I think it plays back into what I want, is that for the past 4 years, I've been growing Foot Being Humble I know the insights on the ground. I have a monthly female founders club where women tell me their struggles. Like, I know these insights and I hear them. So now I can consult brands and say, this is where you can tap into. This is what people need. So it's actually really nice to go back to what I originally wanted to do, which was purpose-led communications and advising brands. But the important thing for me is I've always been, I think I am more of a consultant. I've got down, I've done all the hard stuff. I've delivered 700 pieces of content. I've been on 24-hour call, all of that. And I no longer want that. You know, I want to be able to do a workshop for the day and then walk back out, and that's our relationship. You know, I think that for me is where I, you know, manage my own stress, my mental health. And I think absolutely during lockdown there were parts where I was like, have I made the right decision? But really my stress levels, my happiness, my contentment, I feel a lot calmer not being in.
Must be nice. You must feel more fulfilled now than ever, obviously, kind of. And it's amazing to see that you've kind of took this passion and made it like a full-time career. Like, I mean, it's amazing, really, how you've kind of managed that.
Yeah, I mean, but I remember, I think probably from the age, as soon as I learned about TED Talks when I was about 16, I said I'd love to be a TED speaker. I'd love to get paid to speak. Like, that would be amazing. And classically, I just think with all of those things, you kind of get told like, oh yeah, but what would you speak about? And it just gets like immediately kicked out as an idea. But yeah, to get to do that and to see the impact.
Have you done a TED
I'm
talk?
having? Yeah, I did a TEDx talk.
Was it online?
Yeah, I hate it though. I really don't like it.
How
yeah,
come? I remember reading something that
I wrote an article about it. Yeah.
How come like you?
Basically, it was around the time I was launching my book. I'd come off the back of 2 years of the pandemic, like burnt out really bad. I hate pre-recording content. I get a real fear about it. It's probably one of my biggest impulses.
I always get like a red rash. I used to do that when I come on podcasts. I use like every podcast, like, so I'm having an allergic reaction. Everyone's like, you okay? I'm like,
it's weird because I'm a public speaker, but I just hate the thought of like, I think I'm overly critical and I like, oh, my hair's out of place. Or, oh, why did I pull that face? And I just don't. Anyway, I had like less than a week to write the script, film it by myself and send it back to them. And, you know, it wasn't that moment that I wanted. And, you know, obviously, again, super grateful to get the opportunity, but it was, you know, the sad thing about the pandemic was that it did strip away a lot of the joy of those big moments. Like I didn't get to have a book launch. My book came out the week of 3,000 other books, which is like unheard of because there was a backlog of books, so the sales didn't do as well. You know, there was just a lot of things
like
that, which just kind of like took the buzz out of it. It was still an amazing experience, but there were just things that, due to the pandemic, things changed the way that I may have experienced that process. But so with the TED Talk, for me, it was that once I saw the video, I just didn't like it. I didn't like the output.
Yeah.
And rather than posting it online and being like, oh, I'm so proud of myself, because I wasn't, I sat on it for 3 months. I was like, oh, I just don't want to share it. And then I had a word with myself. I was like, get a grip, share it. This is a big thing. And then when I did, I decided to do it in an authentic way, which was, I really don't like my TED Talk, but here's why I have to share it. Yeah. And I explained, like, I didn't want to share something that wasn't perfect. I'm a perfectionist. I didn't think the output represented me. I didn't want to be judged by this. But at the end of the day, I am really proud, and like, here's to everyone trying. Yeah. And the message I got were just unbelievable. That's amazing. So many more messages, probably more views on the video because I was more authentic, which is why when we talked about what self-promotion is.
I think people can see through people's shit now as well. And I think people kind of want to see someone like being themselves online. And you don't have to be this like different character which you turn on off and on, like, and then as soon as you get off, like, they're completely different. So I think people get, like you say, you're from Leeds, I'm Northern as well. I think people just resonate with who you are. And I remember in my final year degree show, my tutor from college went down and she said this thing, and I thought it was really weird at the time. I didn't really get it, but she was like, oh, just like stick to that core of you. I don't know. And she was like, just stick to the core of you, like, people can see that. And I never really understood it till later on. I was like, oh, like, just stick to being yourself, and like, if you can be honest and open, then hopefully other people can be open back.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like following your passions as well, it's tough because like you've got to figure out like what's monetizable, how can I make revenue, all of those. But I definitely, like, I'm not the person to sit behind a desk. Like that for me is like being chained to a desk is like hell for me. I just can't do that. That's not my deal. Variation every day is super important. Yeah. And I think as you go through your career, you definitely start to identify, okay, what like brings me joy? What do I genuinely get a buzz from? A really good question for like figuring out your passion as well is what do you naturally and like happily put yourself forward for? Yeah. So I listened to a really great podcast, The Diary of the CEO, interviewed an author, and he talked about just because you're good at something doesn't mean that's a strength. And I really love this point. He was like, if it doesn't light you up and make you feel good about yourself, it's a weakness. So a lot of people go, oh, I'm good at maths, I'll do maths at uni.
Yeah.
But you don't love it, you just do it because you're good at it, right? And I think that's so true, is like, we really need to like take note of what we really enjoy doing, what we actually put ourselves forward for, what we get excited to do, and figure out ways that we can apply work or opportunities around that. You may not always get to do I hate doing admin, hate doing all my invoice. Of course, there's loads of parts that I don't love doing. But actually, if it allows me to do, 50% of what I do love, then that's a better.
And it doesn't feel like work as well sometimes.
Yeah.
When you are doing something you're passionate about. I mean, I was up the other night, like, editing a podcast till late. I don't have to. I mean, I do have to do it if I want to get it out each week. But like, I actually enjoy the whole like process, and you don't mind putting in the long hours. And imagine that's the same for you as well. Like,
I always say with like side hustles, anything you're doing around your job, you've got to really love it and have a passion and see where it's going. I think one of the important things as well is like knowing what legacy you want to leave. It's a big question and people get really scared by it. But if you ask yourself, how do I want my grandkids to remember me? Or what do I want people to say about me when I'm not in the room? Then you can start to work backwards and go, okay, well, what am I doing to get to that point?
Yeah.
Or what am I doing to position myself in that way? And really think about exactly those questions. What brings you joy? What motivates me? What am I excited to work on? And try to document that. It's really important to document it, because when we have low confidence, when we feel self-doubt, it's so easy to go, I'm not good at anything.
Yeah.
I'm rubbish. Nothing's good in life.
so have like maybe
So easy.
notes on your phone of like
Regularly
all the
recap
successes,
on what are the things that you're happy with. You know, I have a like wins tracker where I like write all the things that I'm proud of. I also do something with two of my friends where we voice note our wins before dins on a Friday, where we
Amazing.
voice note 2 to 3 things we've done that week that we're proud of and that we're happy we did. And that could be anything from saying no, setting boundaries, winning a client, or just menial, like getting dressed and doing my makeup before midday or whatever, you know. And that regular pattern of keeping a track on what we're doing that we're happy with is really important, because otherwise it's so easy to lose yourself.
I was going to ask you about being like more kind of productive. In regards to do you kind of like set yourself goals like each year? Because I did one at the start of this year, being like, I want to be more consistent with the podcast, for example. Do you kind of set your goals of kind of what you want to achieve?
Firstly, how has that worked for you? I'm interested to know.
Quite well. So I have a whiteboard in my bedroom, and I set 10 kind of like goals. So one of them was like make an entertaining newsletter. One was like be more consistent with a podcast weekly. One was like do the Make Contain website. And I've got through half the list at the minute.
Great.
So yeah, it's kind of worked, and it's kind of kept me track. I also use a thing called Notion. I don't know if you heard of that. And that's like a website for my notes. So that keeps me on track with like the podcast and guests and who I need to reach out to. So that's been really helpful as well.
I always think it's just down to the individual. So I'm not really a 5-year, 10-year plan.
Yeah.
I'm not even really a year-long plan, to be honest.
Go with the flow.
I think when you run your own business, you have to be quite agile, and I think it's great to have dreams. I'm more of a think of dreams. I think of loads of big ideas, got loads of them that I'm ready to do tomorrow.
Just make sure you write them
But
down.
I also, I had someone speak to me recently. They were like, why haven't you, turned your business into like a big thing and built a team and all of that? And I was like, firstly, I actually don't want that. I've been a manager. I've done that stuff. I'm not actually bothered about that space. And everything's about time, right? So we feel so pressured to achieve everything so quickly. I totally get that. But also, I'm probably going to be running my business for a good 10, 20 years, right?
So
I don't have to do everything this year. Like, I think this is something that I've learned for sure. I'm talking from a very calm but definitely something I've learned, that I have loads of ambitions for my business. I have loads of ambitions for myself. But hopefully I'll make it to 70, 80 and I'll do those things for as long as I want. But I don't feel as pressured to do things so quickly anymore. And look, I have had really quick success with Foot Being Humble. And I recently started a second business called This Might Help, which helps to support people who are supporting others through mental health.
Amazing.
And that has been a completely different journey. It hasn't blown up the internet. I've only got 600 followers. It's been a very slow burner, which of course I've had a bit of doubt around as well. But, again, my friends were really great to be like, Steph, you're going to work on this forever. This is something that is not going anywhere. Like, just take it at your own pace.
Yeah.
And actually, by having that mindset, more natural, organic conversations are happening because I'm not pushing it, I'm not forcing it. I'm just speaking to people and then telling them about it without expecting some sort of £10 million deal, you know.
Yeah.
Not that I've ever had that, but it is about just being kind and patient with yourself. It's great to have big dreams, but think about it strategically as well, right? So if I'd have launched a public speaking course during lockdown, who would have come on it? There's nowhere to public speak. If I launch it now when events are coming back up. So you can have loads of ideas for your businesses, your podcast, your career, whatever it is. But do think about when is the best time to sort of strike with that idea. And I think I hit the right moment with the launch of Fuck Being Humble. And I've continued to be very intentional as to when I release products, courses, when I offer out different services, and knowing the best time to allow yourself to rest as well is super important.
It is, because I think my mum always says like, oh, you're burning the candle and on both sides kind of thing. So it is. I think there's a pressure now with like, you see it on like LinkedIn, like Girl Boss and everyone thinking that like you need to be your own entrepreneur or kind of work your own hours. So I feel like there's that kind of pressure sometimes. Like
loads of women don't want to be a girl boss. Like loads of women don't want that. Like that, and that's totally fine. Like I think we need to let go of that.
I remember you saying earlier, like you wasn't planning it, like it just kind of, you just go with the flow and then it kind of happened. Like.
No, for me it was like, it's now or never. Throw myself into it. Worst case scenario, I go back to the ad industry. I think that's what's important, is that like you already have a set of skills. So whatever skills you've got, you know, like embrace the opportunities that come to you when they come to you, right? But don't feel the pressure. Loads of people said to me about when are you going to quit? And I was like, I wasn't ready. I wasn't confident that I was ready to launch that. And I'm glad I took my time, because when I did go full time with Fuck Being Humble, I was way more confident in what I could achieve, and I knew the direction I was going to go in. But I think really it's just always about, I'm a big believer of saying yes to opportunities. I say a yes to a lot of things, not knowing I can do them, and figuring out along the way. And I think that's been a big
the best way,
marker of the reason I've got to where I have with Fuck Being Humble.
Amazing. I just want to know, thank you so much for coming on the Make Insane podcast today. If anyone wants to kind of follow Fuck Being Humble, can you share the website and Instagram?
Yeah, so it's just fuckbeinghumble.com. It's very easy to find. Nobody wanted that domain. My email is steph@fuckbeinghumble.com, and you can follow @fbeinghumble on socials as well.
But yeah, thanks again for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And it's great to kind of finally sit down with you and kind of find out more about Fuck Being Humble and the story behind it. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.